were integrated and were adopted in the new version. There was also a little bit more, this might be getting into the weeds a little bit more, but we also, the team presented us with a version that had a little bit more qualifications and skills spelled out, that provided a little bit more context for the types of things that we're looking for in that leader. So I don't know if that helps a little bit, Mickey.
Thank you.
And Mickey, I'll just add, it's Paul over here. Hello, Mickey. Hello. I'll just add that since I'm on the search committee, we made every change that this group sent in that had word changes and so forth. Liliana sent some, Ann Elizabeth sent some, others, some of the board members did. We made every change there. We understand this has to be a visionary leader. We believe we have all that in there. Dr. Frank rewrote some of the qualifications, as Liliana pointed out. So we think we encompassed it, but we also are really kind of understanding that just the job description is not going to holistically get everything. So we all, I think Liliana, John, I, and the rest of the committee just had to settle on, we could rewrite this thing for the next 3 months and probably not have it right. So we're going to have it 99% right and go out with it. And then we're going to rely on the interviews to bring forth some candidates that we all feel are excellent candidates. So hold tight for the interview process to take place, and then I think you'll have a candidate you like in there.
Thank you, Paul, for saying the majority of what I was hoping to say, because there were specific wording changes that I think did put those qualities in. I just wanted to make one comment on, from watching the discussion at the board meeting, that there was to put it in front of this group regarding the importance of what just happened with the participation in the job description, because even though it's true what you were saying, Paul, that was relayed, that you can't capture it all in the job description. That's we as the folks out here in the constituency trying to understand what is being attracted to be the CEO only have that job description to go on to know what those recruiters might have as their subjectivity when they screen. And I want to say that I think this has been a good process for establishing a relationship more deeply with that, so that the selection committee can bring those concerns into the interviews and make sure that the firm, which does have a heavy sports emphasis, really does go after candidates that are maybe not the first ones they would do, but their vision has been broadened because of the engagement here. And that was actually said specifically at the board meeting, that this caliber of person is probably going to have to be courted. They're probably, it's not necessarily that, this is going to be a search. So I think that this has been a good process.
Anything else for Liliana or John? Okay. John?
I think Gretchen's presentation will probably fine-tune some of the other things that we took into consideration this morning and actually agreed to, as well as the workforce team and the whole idea of moving this thing forward to get the pieces start coming together is crucial at this point. So I would defer to Gretchen to make her detailed presentation at this point.
Okay, any other questions for Liliana or John on the authority? Before I turn over to Gretchen, Mark, you just came in, so welcome. Anything you want to add to anything History Colorado is working on that you want to highlight from your report?
Sure, I just wanted to mention to everybody that we're working with a program from the Conservation Legacy that takes youth to different places across the state, and they look at the historic preservation issues. They may be talking about this a little bit more in the placemaking role today, I'm not sure. But we have them coming here on Monday to do some looking at the campus, talking about what you see as far as the ways to move forward with different aspects of the campus, and we're really excited to be a partner in that.
All right. Any questions for Mark?
Mark, are you going to take that group to Globeville and really look at that history as well, and as well as what's happening here at the stock show?
At this point, we're only here for 8 hours, so we're going to walk around the campus here. We're going to head over to the Baldwin Court area and look at some of that, but everything is focused here at the moment. We're hoping, and we don't know how this will work out, but we're hoping this is just one chance to do this and we're going to come back again and do more, because in one day we can't get everything in, so we're trying to contain it for this point, but we hope to be back.
Anything else, Mickey?
No.
Okay. All right, Gretchen.
Hi, everybody. We've got a lot of material to present to you tonight. So I'm going to start in this new format with some of the high-level updates and then hand it over to the team. You can see on the agenda it's going to be about energy and placemaking, or the deep dives that we want to do tonight. To get started, though, I would like to add, I did a fairly detailed presentation for the authority board today. That was a lot of catch-up material because it was their third meeting, and really just sort of an overview of scope, schedule, budget, contracts, things that we have talked about here a number of times. Unless the CAC would like me to duplicate that, which my impression has been that you would prefer us to do deep dives on the content so that you can have that input role. My plan right now is to keep this material pretty focused on the placemaking and the current activities. I would add that we present every quarter at the City Council meeting called Land Use, Transportation and Infrastructure, LUTI. So that's the best way to see the entire program overview. At the last LUTI presentation, it took us an hour. There are so many moving parts on this and so many contracts. So for now, I would propose that we use that as the forum, and all of those presentations are posted and you can view them on Channel 8. But if you're having a hard time getting to that, or you'd like me to do that summary here, I'm happy to. So I did not bring the same set of materials from the authority, but I'll cover a lot of the same high points that John was talking about. For workforce in particular, we'd like to do a deep dive presentation as we move through and are near the end of our contracting phase with Hensel Phelps on our horizontal integrated contract. That will be going through a city council process, also a very public discussion. And that workforce component was one of the things that we really innovated on as a city and as a team. Tim Sandos was part of that. We had some other external folks form a technical advisory committee, where, just generally speaking, for the first time as a city, we required a workforce plan to be submitted with this large contract, and then we scored and evaluated teams based on that. So we assigned 10 of the 100 points in our scoring committee to workforce. It's the first time as a city that we've done that. And then we're in the process of making those components of the proposal contractually enforceable, and that's what you'll see go through a city council process.
Gretchen, was there any minority goals in that workforce plan?
So this is in addition to the goals process that the city runs. So this is about outreach to every firm that we talk to does workforce development. We are asking these teams to go into the most vulnerable populations and communities as defined by educational attainment, income, employment, as well as veterans and individuals formerly associated with the criminal justice system. And Jeremy's been a part of some of our best practice interviews. So this is in addition to the goals. So just to get started on what we brought for tonight, first, actually, before we go to that slide, I'm just going to give a quick summary of some of the forums and public meetings so that you're aware of what our activities are. In May, we'll be having Facebook Live. Facebook Live events about our vertical procurements, trying to reach out to folks and get information out in the most efficient way. We also had industry open houses at our city offices. We had a total of 150 contractors attend. We had a morning session and an afternoon session this week, and I'd like to thank my team for having so much coffee in a day and donuts. We also had the placemaking meeting for the cultural plan, and I think that Julie and team will be talking about this. So that was on April 12th. And then we had a large industry forum on April 11th. We had about 300 attendees. We also had a follow-up survey with 209 responses to give us feedback. Was this useful? Did we bring the right material? Small businesses at that comprised 52% of participants. So what that shows us is that we are really hitting the audience we want, not just the large contractors. We also, for MWBE, small businesses, emerging businesses, all of these different groups that the city works with that we have built industry lists around and some help with the chambers, that they represented 46% of participants that were there. So we really felt pretty happy about reaching our target audience of really connecting some of the large primes with the potential subs. So we'll continue that as we move. We'll look for another industry forum date as we move into vertical procurement. And speaking of procurement, we're preparing right now to onboard our horizontal designer and our rail consolidation design. We're in contract negotiations and talking to City Council, as I mentioned, about our horizontal integrated contract, which we call the HIC. That's where we have this workforce pilot. It's the right size of contract to pilot because it's $275 million over 5 to 7 years and touches every part of the campus and the horizontal work. And Hensel Phelps was selected for that, so that we are negotiating with them now. And then yesterday, did everyone sign up for the text alerts? Because you'll know this if you signed up for it, but we released the RFQ for architectural and engineering services for the renovation of the maintenance and operation facility. So that RFQ went out yesterday. It's another plug for our text platform. Construction update. We're in full swing on Brighton Boulevard. Brighton Boulevard from 47th to Race Court, and the Race Court Bridge is being rebuilt now, if you're able to, I guess, walk over there since we've shut down the roadway. Storm and drainage work continues starting north of the post office soon. And I think we've had quite a lot of time spent here and on our team with 4701 Brighton. Sean, I think you're going to talk about that as part of our update, but it's going well and we're pretty excited about that. Last, we did have a kickoff for the 1909 Stadium Arena, the historic building. A number of folks here participated in that, Salvador and Kayla and Mark and Armando and who am I missing? We had some really great participants from some of the leaders in the food industry and fresh food access. We had all of our partners there, and it was pretty inspiring to watch that kickoff. And it really was a true emphasis on local benefit, and that was what the best practices conversation was. So a gentleman from the consulting team, and I should just compliment Barb Frommel and Eric Schaffrin helped to lead that from our team. But what we heard was beloved public markets and successful public markets have a local benefit and a mix of uses and incomes and ethnicities and people. And if you don't have that, you have an empty market. And it was a great way to start this out as a place for putting community at the center of our site to make it successful. So they're going to have 4 more meetings to help provide guidance, and then I'm sure we'll do a report out here as we move forward. And also a number of you will be in the room while we're doing it. So if that's something you're interested in and you want to learn more, Barb and I can talk to you about that. And then last, I wanted to put up now, Jason, this slide. We've been thinking a lot as a team about how to talk about all the things we're doing on the river and related to the river, because it was such an important piece of what voters approved in ballot measure 2C. That's most of our public funding. So just ways to visualize and put it together as we move through and talk about what we're accomplishing in the greater picture. So from the beginning, and I'll start top left, the National Western Center had as a guiding principle engaging the river and nature in our master plan. We are also working actively, as we've talked here, with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to provide space for them to address the greater river needs and a much longer stretch of the river. So, we're a neighbor to them. We're one portion of this river. The NWC-CAC and Public Works have been leading this effort to understand storm drainage systems. What we needed to do as a team was pull our campus back from the river and give them space to work. So that's what you'll see on our campus site plan and our site boundaries, pulling back to the 10-year flood line so that they have the space to make improvements related to conveyance, habitat, recreation. We're partnering with Metro Wastewater, so we'll be bringing that forward. That's the term sheet and IGA that we're talking with them about to move and bury the Delgini Interceptor, which really creates that access to the river. As you saw in great detail, our site plan also moved the rail off the river and refocused our site to provide that access. We also obviously have the riverfront open space that's been carried forward from our master plan to the current site plan. New bridges that provide access to new bridges, also continuing from the master plan to our site plan. Placemaking is working on public realm to create usable and active spaces that are interconnecting the river to the rest of our campus. And then we also coordinate as a city, not just as the National Western team, but with Parks Department, with Public Works, with NWC-CAC, to make sure that there's a connection between Heron Pond, Heller Open Space, Carpio Sanguinetti Park, so that you really see there's a path now for a horse on our site to go up across the bridge and around the park. And we've never put all of these together, and I want to thank AE, because she said this to me after our industry forum, that we needed to talk about some of these benefits that we've been able to accomplish and start to show them as a package. And this is, I'm welcome for feedback on this if there's other ways. It helps all of us communicate what we're doing here and why we're spending all of these hours together to try to get the best product in this reconstruction move forward. But this is a big piece of it. So I'll stop there. Those were the updates that I wanted to provide. But I do have a note that for workforce and with our horizontal contract, we will do a deep dive on that. If you have other suggestions and want to send them, I guess, to Jason, Liz, or Maria, then we'll make sure we're doing a deep dive with our team on the things that are the most beneficial here.
Okay. Any questions of Gretchen at this point?
Is someone else talking about the timeline on the energy thing?
We're going to do a deep dive today. The other thing that I think we have on the agenda, not only we're doing workforce, but at some point, and I think, Nikki, you've brought this up a couple of times, and we want to make sure that we assemble all the right people from the city, because it's outside of the National Western, is the affordable housing issue. So my assumption is that we will probably get to workforce in June?
Oh, in
May? In May, okay. So we may be able to be ready to do affordable housing in June, okay? So we've been talking through that. But it's way beyond National Western, right? It takes a lot of other city departments to get involved. AE?
I just want to say one quick thing about this slide. I would just ask all of my peers and all of us on the CAC to really take note and give voice to these specific benefits. Part of what's happening is the assertion is becoming increasingly made that it's $1 billion project to give a nicer home to cows. And I don't want this project to be politicized in that manner. Over 80% of the constituencies in these neighborhoods here and across the state, the city, okay this. So please keep that. I'm sorry to see that slide, but I feel like to say accomplished benefits doesn't mean we can't continue to challenge the project to become what it should become. But the incremental things that have to do with the vision of it are what are going to secure that, regardless of any politics. So I just want to go on record saying that.
Mickey?
I think it's fantastic to be able to see these things. I think it would be really helpful to look at some timelines with them too.
Yeah.
And if you could do that, it would be helpful.
John?
Mickey, not being facetious here, but one of the timelines is from 1970 to now, and we're here now. And as one of the original members of the Platte River Redevelopment Corporation that Mayor McNichols initiated at that time, we have come a long way, and this is not making any jokes about my Catholic upbringing, but this is like apparition to me. I've watched the Platte River go from what it was back then to what it's becoming now. And even across from your taxi site, you can see the development coming up there. And I am particularly just out of bounds with enthusiasm to see where we have come so far. But rest assured, we've got a long way to go yet. And I think back of the people that are no longer with us that had a lot to do with the initiation of this concept. But we have a lot to look forward to in melding the communities, the river, and the National Western Center. And the future is just, it's great to look at. And I say that with a lot of personal and deep feelings of involvement on the Platte River effort itself. And thank you for your continued concern, Mickey. It's only that way that we can keep moving forward.
Thank you.
Okay, Brad?
Thank you, Maria, and thank you. All right, now we on? So thank you, Maria, and thank you everyone for giving us an opportunity this evening to do a deep dive on some of the campus energy opportunities that we've been tracking. Again, my name is Brad Dodson. I'm the Deputy Director for the Mayor's Office of the National Western Center. And I want to introduce as well, she introduced herself earlier, Barb Frommel is our Director of Strategic Partnerships. As you all know, partnerships are at the heart of everything that we do with National Western Center. This campus is a campus of opportunity and a campus for partnerships. And Barb has done some great work around creating partnerships to help us further the vision for the master plan around campus energy. And as we continue to look for partners on campus energy, we want to share with you some of what we've learned through the conversations that we've had over the last couple of years. So the National Western Center Master Plan challenges us to think about create a regenerative campus. And what this means is that we want to look beyond just minimizing our environmental footprint, but to look at how we can actually create positive outcomes for the environment, for the community, for the economy, and to take a next step forward on how we think about environmental stewardship and sustainability. The question though that came out of the master plan was, this is a bold vision, but is it feasible? Is there really an opportunity here at this campus to do a net zero energy campus, to really reduce our footprint so much that we actually produce positive outcomes? And after a number of studies and research programs that we've done, we have heard a resounding yes, that it's possible here, that there are real opportunities that are available on site that we can leverage and that we can use to create positive outcomes. And as you see here, as we talk about partnerships, we have just a few of the examples here of partners that we've been working with over the last couple of years. And I want to highlight one in particular, Xcel Energy, as the regulated utility for Denver. They are a vital partner in this. And just this week, we received a letter, and obviously you don't think you can read it here, but I'm going to pass this around, and I can make this available to Jason to put up on the website. But Xcel Energy sent a letter to the Mayor's Office of the National Western Center confirming their interest in partnering with us, with the National Western Center, as well as with any campus energy partner that is selected through an upcoming procurement. They would partner with us and offer their expertise as an energy provider to help us maximize the options and the opportunities here with their programs that they offer. And those programs have continued to evolve. They expanded them last year, and they continue to evolve. But Xcel has been really a strategic partner in this, and really has validated the work that has been happening on this campus in regards to campus energy. So I want Barb to ask Barb to come up and talk a little bit about some of the specific opportunities that we have heard that have been validated from industry and that are readily available on the campus.
Thanks, Brad. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to just go through a few of these opportunities that, again, are really taking advantage of locally available resources, proven and reliable technologies that have also been verified by industry as being appropriate for meeting our energy demands here at the National Western Center. One of those is very obvious and kind of something that we can all picture pretty easily is rooftop solar. As you know, and this is a kind of a zoomed in version of our new site plan, we have some very large scale buildings at the National Western Center that have flat roofs. And really that presents ideal conditions for rooftop solar photovoltaic. And we've done a lot of work on understanding what this opportunity is and how far will rooftop solar get to helping us meet our energy demands and our projected energy demands here at the National Western. Happy to say that we're really confident that rooftop solar, given the amount that we can fit on these rooftops, but also working within Excel's existing programs, we're really excited about the ability to provide either all or close to all of our energy needs here. So this is something that we're going to have to work very closely with Excel on in terms of utilizing their existing programs and understanding what those opportunities are and which of their programs make the most sense for us. But so far, the work that our subject matter experts have done has been really promising in terms of solar. Another opportunity we have, and this is something we've talked about with CAC several times back when we were working on our Delgany study, there is a free, untapped, and unregulated source of thermal energy in the Delgany interceptor pipes. There's something that is called sewer heat recovery. This is a proven technology that is really used worldwide. It hasn't been used too much in the U.S., but coincidentally, Avon, Colorado, their municipal buildings and their rec center are heated and cooled with this technology. And so we've been working very closely with Metro Wastewater. They own the pipes and they own the heat in the pipes. But they have been a wonderful partner in essentially helping us to get access to this heat and also working with us on the relocation and burial of those pipes so that we can really, not only heat and cool our buildings very efficiently, but also open up that open space. And this sewer heat recovery and the Delgany interceptor story is one of those ones that really tells the story of regeneration very well, because these decisions to both access this thermal energy source, relocate these pipes, have ripple effects across both energy and water, waste, and it's really, it's kind of hitting the essence of that regeneration goal. So specifically, the reason why Metro is very interested in us using that heat is because eventually that water goes to the wastewater treatment plant, and then after it's treated, it goes into the river. And if we're able to take some of that heat out of the water, then that lowers the temperature of their effluent and thereby increases and improves the water quality in the Platte River. And so it's kind of connecting that energy and waste and water and environment very closely in terms of these decisions we're making. In order to take advantage of this opportunity for sewer heat recovery on the site, we need to build a district energy system. And that is just thinking about energy and heating and cooling buildings just a little bit differently than you typically would. So in your typical building, you have boilers and chillers, and you're using natural gas to heat and cool your house or your building. With a district energy system, you'll see down here at the bottom, this is the location where the Delgany interceptor runs underground right underneath that spot. That is the location where we would build some infrastructure to pull the heat off the pipes, essentially transferring that heat from the wastewater in the pipes to a piping system that kind of runs up the spine of the campus and connects to every building. And then through a series, instead of boilers and chillers, we have a set of heat pumps and heat exchangers. This system of heat pumps and heat exchangers is more than 4 times efficient than as boilers and chillers, which essentially lowers the energy demands of the entire campus and allows us to get that much closer to that net zero energy goal. The other thing that it does is essentially allows us to electrify the campus. So instead of using natural gas, we're using electric heat pumps. And because it's electric, we can now use renewable sources to provide that energy. And so again, you've seen that we're primarily targeting solar photovoltaics for that renewable solar energy for that renewable source. But in the future, if we decide to plug in other alternative renewable sources, the system's fully flexible. We can plug all of those in. Another opportunity that we're pursuing through this is trying to understand how campus energy can provide opportunities to the broader community. So it's much like the rest of what we're doing at the National Western Center. And so we will have language in the upcoming procurement that basically asks industry and asks proposers about this. How can we work with our energy partner and with Excel Energy to make sure that this campus energy system offers opportunities for the broader community? And there's a lot of different examples of what that might look like. And once we have our energy partner on board, we can really delve into those kind of detailed conversations of what that might look like. I think Brad's going to talk about the procurement process now.
So thanks, Barb. We are tracking a date, December. Sorry,
Please, while you're talking about the Dalgety interceptor issue. I have a question in reference to the Dalgety interceptor issue. You're remodifying the system to more of a closed system, and how will that affect the odor concerns for the community going forward while we're working on all this?
Yes, that's a really good question. I don't know about the closed system part. I can't address that. And if you have technical questions about the system, we'd have to bring our engineers in to talk about that. What I can tell you is that part of the agreement we're working on with Metro Wastewater includes a biofilter that is being built specifically for controlling odors. And that's something that they have identified as an issue that they need to address in this vicinity. And so they're making plans to address those odor issues. And so we're really excited about that because we certainly we want those odors to be contained. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it kind of does, but I'd like to also find out is when they'll be able to come in, because we have been told a few times that engineers would come in and kind of explain how they're going to address these issues. And so if someone could come in to be more specific in explaining exactly how it's going to work and possibly what kind of timeline we could look at.
Okay, are you asking specifically about the odor control? You want someone to come and explain about that or about the sewer heat recovery?
Well, I assume that the whole system's being kind of redesigned. And with it being redesigned, then how that's going to affect the odor as well as, the rest of the community, because not only is this tied specifically to the National Western, this is tied to the entire GES&A that's there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to have them come in, similar to Maria's proposal around housing. It's an issue that's both part of our campus, but part of a broader conversation. One thing that Barb and the team have been working on with this need for a biofilter is actually giving Metro the space on the campus to build it. And so that's part of the agreement, so that it locks in a location and really a construction schedule to make that component happen. I think that's something they've been looking for some time. And we were able to identify land in that southern part of the campus that didn't really have a use and was the right size for them to build that. So, but I think it's a great idea to have them come in.
Okay, so briefly talking about our campus energy procurement process. we are tracking to a date in December of this year to align design of the campus energy system with the overall horizontal design that is beginning now. That, as Barb showed in her previous slide on thermal, there was a brief, and I'll go back to it. You see the utility corridors, a little snapshot, a cross section of the utility corridors. And so what we need to do is to be able to, as we're designing those utility corridors throughout the site, to know what exactly a campus energy provider would need to install in those corridors. And so we are tracking to that date and then moving backwards from there. We started off this process through a request for information in November of last year, and the RFI was pretty agnostic about what the technologies would be on the campus. We really wanted to hear from industry what was appropriate, and the technologies that Barb just mentioned, the opportunities around solar, PV, and sewer heat recovery. We heard that over and over again from industry that was the right technologies to be looking at on this campus because as Barb mentioned, they were readily available, they were safe and proven technologies. We've advanced that design with the feedback that we heard from industry through our Jacobs team, through engineers on their team, have done some preliminary design, which was shown on that previous slide, and we will be including that work in a request for qualifications that we expect to send out next week. Over the summer, we'll be doing, or in early summer, we'll be doing a short list and then a request for proposals, and then working with a selected firm to align that design with the horizontal design. And then we will go into to construction and then long-term operations and maintenance for a period of years for the authority to be able to hopefully be able to power their campus through all alternative renewable energy. So we're really excited about the process and kind of where we are in that, and really excited about the opportunities that exist on this campus to really to achieve that bold vision that's laid out in the master plan. And so with that, we're happy to entertain any other questions that you might have.
Mickey?
So is wind considered at all, or is that a feasible, or do you have enough without using any kind of wind energy?
Mickey, in an earlier study, which we called our Energy Action Plan report that we did with Excel Energy last year, we looked at wind, and that study revealed that it probably wasn't the most economically efficient or cost-effective way of bringing renewables to the campus. That being said, and so what we're focusing on in our concept design are really some of those key technologies that we feel will meet our base demands. I think there's lots of room for innovation and demonstration projects on top of those main concepts, and so we're really open to what industry brings to us.
Thank you.
Armando?
Mark, just to follow up on Mickey's question, what was the determining factor that wind wasn't an effective measure or your ROI? I mean, we have a wind turbine down here in Garden Place, and we have solar panels, and we have a self-contained energy system that's self-sufficient there. And I think some of the things that you mentioned in your plan, you talk about renewable energy. I think the goal here, and I don't see it in your presentation, is self-sufficiency, maintaining the system. But you went off on, or you guys go off on this renewable stuff, which is cool and stuff, I understand what, but I think the end result should be like smart buildings, using some more innovative, creative techniques in terms of technology, not just the heat and the solar panels. I think there's some more things out there that could be looked upon to really make this campus dynamic and futuristic. We need somebody like Elon Musk to take a look at this or something. I mean, it's cool. I think you guys are scratching the surface, but I think there's a lot of substance that's missing.
Yeah, what we presented today was really just a snapshot. I totally agree with you, and this is obviously going to be more complex than what we showed you today. When to next week, and there's a campus energy concept released with that. You'll see a little bit more of that detail.
Now, are you guys looking at pulling any electric off the river? You know, with,
Is it hydroelectric?
yes.
No, we're not looking at that. Again, the technologies that we highlighted here are what we heard from industry as the greatest opportunity to look at technologies that are safe and that are proven and they're reliable. And that's really the lens that we looked at in the RFI, and the feedback that we heard from industry was really focused on these two technologies.
Okay.
So I appreciate the presenting optimism toward the net zero vision. And what I'd like to ask you to comment on is what's behind something the conversations, the references to the risk and the timeline that a trade-off might have to be made where in fact we end up with conventional energy systems. And I think it's important for people to know what that process is as part of our vigilance toward a 100% commitment that if there is something that interferes in the coordinated unfolding of this, that we recognize innate to the nature of this project is a commitment to net zero energy consumption, which does include all of the smart technologies and the efficiencies and all this sort of a thing. But I've heard this now in conversation at the advisory board and kind of, so I get that there is a process whereby our very talented team has to coordinate all these lines of things, and I would like you to help this entire group understand what it is we have to be vigilant for, because I want timelines to adjust if we're in danger of losing something as essential to the vision of this project as our goals as you're describing them.
So thank you, AE, and the timeline that we have presented here is an aggressive timeline, and we are working diligently to meet that timeline. We're tracking, as I mentioned, to this mid-December date to align the design for campus energy with the horizontal design. And there's not schedule risk as part of this, but we are working as quick as we can to make sure that we line that up, because we cannot afford to delay the overall horizontal work. We are on a tight schedule there. So, but we are confident that the schedule that we've laid out here can get us there. It is aggressive, and it requires a lot of hard work from our team, but we're fully committed to doing what we can to hit that alignment of schedules.
I have a comment that I feel I must make at this point. We have two determining factors. The main one is time. And the zero energy goal is, I feel, a strong possibility of being met. The wind concept, Armando, had you in mind at the meeting this morning. In fact, I brought it up, and I don't think it's totally out of the picture. The Platte River, there's all kinds of possibilities for energy if we can keep enough water in it in future years. The most exciting thing that I got this morning from the presentation that was made is the unleashed opportunity for potential here. There's community benefits that be derived from this. There's educational benefits for future generations. There's a hands-on, come and see what we do in the future. I think that the team that has been working on this has done a phenomenal job, and as your representative on the authority, I'm going to make sure in future discussions that we not totally eliminate any other possibilities, but it's important that we forge ahead within a timeline, a reality achievement. As Paul used to say, the show must go on. So everything we do has got to be geared to getting it done. And that's the time urgency that we're dealing with now. I think you guys have done a phenomenal job and continue to do so, and I say, let's give them all a little bit of applause.
There you go.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions of the committee? I've had a request from the audience for a couple of questions, so Gretchen and I discussed, and I think I want to make sure that the committee has all their questions answered before, at least we'll get the questions on the table. It's a decision whether we answer them now or answer them at the end of public comment, because we obviously have a long agenda that we have to get through. So committee members, do you guys have any more questions about this presentation before we, yeah, Armando?
John, I'd like to invite you over to Garden Place May 2nd. Garden Place has been acknowledged as the school to host the World Conference on Green Schoolyards. You have an opportunity to see the new research station that has been enabled by Gretchen and Maria and Paul and Nikki and some other fantastic folks in this area. And you'll get to see a first-hand view of how innovative, creative academic techniques work in a learning environment and self-sufficiency. Follows right in line with the model that they just presented. That's May 2nd, 4400 Lincoln from 2 to 4.
I know. Thank you for your invite. I'll certainly make every attempt to be there if you buy the drinks after. You know.
Glasses of water.
Any other questions? Armando, so I have something on my calendar that starts at 5 for that place too.
That's the reception. We wanted you to speak at the reception.
Okay, but it's from 2 to 4, and then
For
we're,
the actual hands-on, you'll be able to see the technology actually work.
okay, all right, so if I go, okay, so I'll make sure that everybody gets exactly all the times and get it around to the CSC to be present. So, if you could introduce yourself and say who you represent.
Hi, I'm Lauren Snyder. I think most of you know me. Two questions. Are you getting some kind of an exemption from the Green Roof Initiative requirements, or how do you have room on those roofs for all those solar panels along with your soft farms?
This is one I think we can answer right now. So what we are doing in the RFQ, before we get to the RFP, we will have to know what's going on with the Green Roofs Ordinance. Our understanding from that team is that there's a task force of both public and private sector folks and city council, and even the folks that initiated the ballot meeting together to come up with some broader ways to accomplish the benefits identified in the Green Roofs Ordinance.
I understand that. I was at the Water Symposium today,
Okay.
and they spoke about it for about 30 minutes.
Well, that's just for everyone else in the room
recommendations to
too.
city council, and how long it will take council to
Right.
make some decisions and actually pass something on this issue.
So the short answer, that was largely for the rest of the room who were able to hear that. But the short answer is that we will follow the law. We will comply with the Green Roofs Ordinance, but we are waiting to see what happens with that and then how that interfaces. It obviously doesn't impact our use of the Delgany or the thermal heat.
I certainly hope you get it changed substantially.
Yeah, no, it's a good question.
My
Thank
other
you.
question has to do with the heat pumps.
With the what?
The heat pumps. Have your engineers looked at the long-term maintenance costs of the heat pumps? I've dealt with many heat pumps in commercial buildings in my 25 years as a property owner and developer. And about year 10, those compressors start crapping out. And the long-term maintenance costs of those heat pump systems can be substantial. So make sure you're including those numbers in your evaluation.
That's a
All right, crapping out.
That's a great comment. Part of the work that we're doing around the preliminary design work is looking at a cost of ownership that compares business as usual connected to the grid with this campus energy concept, and we have put those O&M costs in that model. So we are looking at that.
I'm glad that you brought the green roof issue up, because that came up for discussion a little bit this morning. It's my understanding that they are the team, and Gretchen, please correct me if I'm, and they're in constant negotiation now, or the task force is actually working to come up with an end result plan.
Council has to take action.
Then council will take action, and it can be modified within a 6-month period. Is that correct?
After 6 months, then council could take an action, so city council members are also part of that task team.
Yes, and I'm confident that, that we will be able to comply with whatever requirements are finalized. I'm looking hopefully for some flexibility and in their inclusion of all the other green space on campus. So it's not that as a board member that would be trying to do an end run there, intention would be to comply. I think that the issue of green is certainly two phases, money green and growing green. So we need to be aware of that and look forward to working that out. Thank you.
AE, real quick. We need to.
Just an exclamation point on what was reported at, also at the board meeting today. The head of the task force on this made the comment, I think it was the task force, that the National Western Center is actually meeting or exceeding the formula for what the goal is to a favorable impact with these green measures, because they're working on different ways to get the same net result if the costs and technologies can be modified. So the signs are really good that the standards that were set on this project, even before the green roof, are going to help with what the mission of the green roof is around the heat mitigation and that kind of a thing. So I think it looks real good.
Okay. Anything else on our end? All right. Thank you, guys. Place banking.
We have to finish the update first, though. Sorry. Sean, come on up. So this is Sean Snow, our new manager of Historic Resources. So Sean is going to talk a little bit about 4701. These are three things we're talking about today. 4701 Brighton update, the historic resources process that we've been talking about, and then we've had a site visit and doing our catalog of site elements. So just three quick things. So I'll turn it over to Sean.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Of course, 4701 Brighton has been on a lot of folks' minds with the widening of Brighton Boulevard. We had to make a decision to carefully deconstruct this building. And so the drone photo you see here starts to show the process for deconstructing that building. During that process, of course, we've done what's called a laser scan, which you'll see pictures of that here shortly. We took careful inventory of everything that was inside 4701. That would include any historic elements that could be incorporated if the building is reconstructed later on. So we have all of that stored. We took careful photographs of the inside. So Saunders Construction is the one that is, of course, working on this careful deconstruction process. You can see some of those items we recovered, including a nice old tub, or a number of those, some of the shelving. So all of this has been saved since we're, we want to have everything available for this building in the future. This aerial view, again, showing the roof carefully removed since it had asbestos and whatnot in there. The rest of the process requires carefully removing bricks essentially into buckets down below, and then they are collecting them, which I'll show you here shortly, into some pallets. This laser scan that's been done of the building have taken all these little points to essentially recreate 4701, so in the future, if the building is reconstructed, we'll have all of that record together, so we will be able to put it back together. And these are those pallets that show the bricks. So the bricks are removed, they're cleaned, put back in there, and they'll be stored inside. So there'll be a lot of those pallets of bricks, and they'll be able to be utilized for the exterior of the building, but of course any future use of that building on the interior would, we have not retained any of that, other than the doors and windows and things like that, tubs and whatnot.
Do you have any idea how much that process is costing?
Do we have any idea on how much that process is costing? Eric, do you know, or should I ask David?
David's probably the guy.
David, do you know?
It's all in, it's about 300,000.
300,000?
Yes.
So there's 300,000. Of course, we've costed out different things if the building can be moved. That was much more expensive. So this was a compromise. Of course, we didn't want to delay the expansion of Brighton. So this was a way to respect what was there until we can make a better decision on what the future is for that area. Any questions on 4701?
All right, so we've been talking now a few months about the historic resources study that we're doing and the update. We've got the report drafted, and so we're now doing our internal reviews of this, and we'll bring this to you next month. But it's got an introduction, the summary of all the historic properties, the process we've used to get to this point, key findings and features, and I'll go through that a little bit more in the next slide. Mitigation and how we're going to deal with all these buildings on site, and then summary of possible funding resources and grant opportunities with all these facilities, and then a next steps component. So in the key findings and features, we've got 35 resources that we've identified. And so that includes all the historic buildings that are eligible to be local landmarks, so more than 30 years old. The historic pens in the yards area. The railroads are potentially historic. They've been there a long, long time. National Western Drive, formerly Packing House Road, is also a historic resource, so we have to document that. And then, of course, the water tower and the sheep bridge. So we're trying to look at all these historic elements. It's not just buildings, okay? So in the findings and features, we've kind of, for the buildings component, identified 5 levels that we're looking at the buildings, the categories that they'll go in. So the first one is properties for rehabilitation. And those are things like the Armored Admin Building and the Livestock Exchange Building. We don't own Livestock Exchange, but it's staying on campus. So those will have to be rehabbed as we go through our process for the redevelopment of the campus, all right? So they're not going anywhere. The second one that is properties that are documented and be studied for potential relocation, like we're doing with 4701 Brighton. There are also buildings like this number 6 here. That's the old scale house number 6. It's not very big, but it's really a cool little building. So, how can that be deconstructed, moved? Could it be used as the plazas? Could it be used as public space components? So we want to, the campus placemaking team and Jay and his team will look at all these buildings that we've identified that could possibly be moved and study those and see how we might be able to reuse them in the campus. Then the third category is properties that are documented, salvaged, and demolished. So that's, for instance, the stockyards and existing tracks. We want to document all that stuff, but we're not putting it back, we're not saving it. All right, we're saving some of the stockyards components, and we'll talk about that in a second. And then next one is properties that will be documented, interpreted, and demolished. So that's, for instance, La Montagne. We're not going to keep that and then do Delgany Intercept or removing, but we definitely want to document all that stuff, okay? So that's the category for that. And then the last category is properties that are documented and demolished. The Pepsi Arena in the stockyards right now is just an old metal building. It really has no historic value. Certainly has usage value for Paul right now. But there are buildings like that that will just be documented and demolished. So we're categorizing all those historic components into those 5 pieces. All right. So the next steps on this one, we need to study possible locations for some of those buildings that might be moved, and see where they could go on the campus. We also want to look at relocation costs for those and get costs for that. We've already got Saunders online, who's doing our demo work, to also help us cost some of those things. We'll update the summer report and bring this back to you next time. So that's where we're at with the historic resources. Any question on that? All right, and then we have one more slide, and I'll let Sean talk about this one. He's been in charge of this.
Yeah, so we've had a fun exercise of trying to document all of the resources that are within the Pens area. So of course that's been a very long land use there, and a lot of the Pens are older the further you go in, and we want to make sure we have a careful understanding of the resources that are there, whether that be a wooden gate or a metal hook or a old trough. We just want to make sure we have a good understanding of what's there. So MIG, of course, has gone in and categorized all these resources that are there, and we've done one of 2 site visits where a group of 20 of us met recently on site to carefully use an app, an Esri app, to go through and ping all these different resources, and we'll create a large inventory sheet that the demo contractor Saunders will be able to use in the future to make sure that we are carefully taking everything apart for a number of different uses. They could be salvaged for reuse at the new campus. A lot of these have monetary value for National Western, so they could be potentially auctioned off if you wanted a piece of the old gate. Perhaps the family that had that pen wants to give a donation for a part of the gate. I mean, we really don't know what they could be worth, so we want to make sure all of that is available. And so we still have the second half of those pens to go through, but we found some very interesting things so far. So that's a continuing part of the process. So we're trying to be very careful with not just these smaller resources, but with all of the other historic buildings on site to make sure we're making thoughtful decisions on the eventual disposition of everything that we find. So that's the end of that piece. Are there any questions?
Yeah, questions from the committee? None? I have a question.
Yes.
Given the fact that you're demolishing and storing, I asked Gretchen this, but I want to make sure everybody knows because she just told me the answer for part of it. There's obviously some sense of security that you want to secure some of the stuff. Where, not that maybe you want to disclose any secrets, but are like these pallets inside? Are they physically someplace?
So on Packing House Road, yeah, we're saving the. Don't tell. It's in some building over there on National Western, but those will stay there for the long term. Is that true?
Yeah, so they're being housed, we have a warehouse building with Saunders using it as their construction site office. And so they're housed in there, they have their own security system in there. And everything that we salvage from not just 4701, but from all the buildings on campus is being stored securely there. We're gonna catalog everything, it'll all be in order. So in the future, it'll be available to the placemaking team if they want to use these assets within the campus.
Got it, thank you.
So if an artist, sometimes if we have leftover hooks or something and a future artist says, oh my goodness, that could make a great sculpture. I mean, we really don't know, so we're just trying to be careful with those resources so they'll be available for any.
I mean, I know that Paul is worried about the yards, and if we want to reuse some of that stuff, right, that it doesn't.
Right, so that's.
And that's a little different because that's still there, right?
Right. So it'll be done in phases, and no, we're definitely recognize the fact that they're still being used. They'll be used for the next stock show. We're also worried that some of the folks in the next stock show might say, "Hey, I want to take this now." So they're gonna,
that's what we're actually really worried about.
Sign. I know it'll make its way up the chain of command to Paul, of course, but yes, we've already been told that there will be signs up saying, "Hey, we're still using this, so don't take this back home with you," or anything like that. Because in order to raise funds for the National Western, they want to be able to auction off key pieces of that. And that's
but also there's some families that have had positions forever, and they feel it's their part of their family budget, right?
So and those and so that part, National Western will identify those for sure to make sure that those are more closely dealt with as well.
John, did you have a question?
Yes, I had one thing. The Oshie barn, that'll be demolished. The structure itself. Now, has a decision been made as to the bridge?
We're working through that. There are some conflicts with New National Western Drive at the east end of that we're working through right now to see how that works. We have not made a final decision on that. There's two things we have to do. One is we have to get an engineering review of that bridge and just see what condition it is in. If it can stay in place with reasonable modifications, then it will. But we may have to remove a piece of it to get it out of New National Western Drive.
Okay.
So we don't know the final disposition yet. But we're
time.
Oh, well, we probably need to know this probably by June, July.
Okay, this year?
Worked out, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
questions, because I have another question, but go ahead, Vern. Yeah,
The bridge that sits in the middle of the river.
That's the sheep bridge. that we
Right,
just talked about.
I got you there.
Yep.
And, you know, it's not connected on either side, okay? We have problems with that bridge because it builds up debris and clogs our storm drainage system in there. So what's
The other piece of the bridge that we need to work with is with the urban waterways and the urban drainage and flood control district, because that does create a barrier in the river. And so we want to work with them too to figure out what the best way, if it stays, the best way to divert some of that debris so that it doesn't get clogged. Or if it can't stay because of the flood issues, we'll have to deal with that.
John.
How old is that bridge?
Well, how old are you?
Probably, I'm guessing 1930s, but we can, I think I've got it in the report, but I don't have it with me, so.
Okay, well,
Yeah, because Lava Town was built
I
in
can
29,
understand,
so.
I can understand your concern, Vern, but in the '65 flood, I stood on the west bank of the Platte River, and that bridge did not accumulate enough debris to cause a problem. The problem was the railroad trestle at about 48th there, and that was laid on the west bank of the river.
That's right.
As a unique engineering job that Mother Nature did via the Platte River flood. So my memory does not reflect any encumbrances by the sheep bridge on the Platte River. It's true, it does have a pillar in the middle of the river. It's withstood the high water, low waters for its lifetime, and I think you need to consider that in your evaluation. The engineers, I think you can engineer things in, and you can engineer them out. But that bridge has some significance to the surrounding neighborhoods, and I think every effort ought to be made to take an honest look at it and make an evaluation.
That's what we're gonna do.
That, to my knowledge, it's never caused any real impediments to the flow of water in the Platte River.
I have to differ with you on that, John, because as far back as last year, I had to have Public Works come out there with a massive piece of equipment to go ahead and clear the debris so that we can get our storm drainage system going where it comes off our property. So it is an issue. I understand your point. But on the other side, it is something that needs to be addressed, whether it's removed or something else is done down there to deal with.
I agree with you there, and maybe you're serving on the drainage. Your position on the drainage in Globeville certainly should address that. Not just your concerns, but the concerns from 31st all the way to the city limits.
Anything else from the committee? Anything else from the committee? I have one other question, only because we've had excavations in interesting places in the metro area, and next thing you know, we are mounting some sort of new animal at the Museum of Nature and Science. Is there what we do? I mean, the mammoth in Aspen and the Thornton Fire Station. I mean, this thing hasn't been dug up for 112 years, right? So, are you? I mean, I know that History Colorado and everybody in Historic Denver, but are we archaeologically communicating with the Museum of Nature and Science?
We haven't talked to them specifically, but we do have an archaeologist on our team. They have done their initial review of the site already.
No dinosaurs buried anywhere?
Well, not that they know of, but we have them coming out looking at our geotech borings that we're starting to do now, so that they can sift through those and make sure we don't have anything in there. And then we also have ground penetrating radar that we're using in places where we know these buildings have been, that we can check and see what's still under there.
Got it. Okay, interesting. All right. That's a good answer.
One more comment.
Sure.
What's the possibility of teaming up? What's the possibility of teaming up with the museum folks and doing a mini archaeological dig out here?
It's been discussed.
Okay, because I'm familiar somewhat back in the 70s again, in Bedford-Stuy in New York. The neighborhood there actually did a dig, and the articles that they recovered in that dig told a lot of history about some of the early abolitionists and the train, not the physical train, but the train that snuck the slaves out and ended up working in some of the Dutch dairy farms in that era at that time. And that was revealed through an archaeological dig, which now hosts a public ice skating rink there now in Bedford-Stuyvesant, the old neighborhood.
Well, and Jay might be able to touch on this too when he gets to the programming piece. But we're also we're trying to set up meetings with museums and other partners to talk about what those programming opportunities on the site can be for educational, and certainly the archaeological dig can be one of those.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right.
All right, thank you.
I just want to also thank David Richards and Summer Westbrooks for providing the information that we just presented, or a lot of it, so thank you.
Great, thank you. Jay. Jay and Julie. Jay and Jay, sure. I'm sorry. It's been a long day.
Hello, everybody. We had a great meeting just about, I think it was 2 weeks ago, April 12th. I was at the Swansea Recreation Center. We had about 45 attendees, plus a bunch of staff and consultant team members on the placemaking study team. And really it was to gather community input on, it was kind of focused on the cultural plan more broadly, but we framed it about the stories. So if you remember when we first met with you all back in, I think August, September of last year, we were talking about what placemaking is, and it's really about the storytelling. And we're finally getting to that, really fun time where we're, sort of connecting the stories to the place and thinking about how that manifests in the design of the public realm and what the experience is like throughout the campus. And so we had a combination of presentation, large group discussion, open house again. So you can see some photos here. There's presentation, a lot of great questions. You actually see many CAC members as well as audience participants tonight. We're at the meeting, so this will be a little redundant for some of you who are there, but what we talked about was how with the cultural plan, what we're trying to do is think about the mission and guiding principles for the campus, really continuing to build on that great foundation of the master plan, and thinking about now what some of the opportunities are, looking at education, as was just discussed, thinking about health and entertainment, and recreation, regeneration, technology, and food, and how those all come together to create this place. And so we talked about it in 3 different layers. One was about the common thread. So Eric and I sometimes call this the red thread, the common thread, but it's kind of the what wraps it all together, right? Because we're going to have stock show in January. There may be community movies and concerts. There'll be festivals and events. The county fair is probably still on the site. There's research and learning and integrated throughout. School kids are coming to the campus. So what really kind of ties it all together? So that would be the common thread. Talking about the stories and categories of those stories, which I thought was fun because it rhymed. But that's talking about the past, the present, and the future, moments, memories, and meaning. And we used several examples that you'll end up seeing in the cultural plan. We're on a timeline where that should be delivered by next month's meeting. But we talked about the indigenous people. We talked about the archaeological history of the site. And we actually used Betty Cram's story as well. And she was very gracious to allow us to do that. She was at the meeting. Just to provide some examples of some of the really rich stories. And then the storytelling. So how does that get expressed on the site? So through a variety of ways. And in a large group discussion, one of the major points was, the interest in a lot of the imagery that we were showing was focused just on the phase 1 and 2 kind of boundaries that we've been using for site planning and all of these different things. And the sense was that we were losing some of the kind of oomph of the master plan, really connecting to and stitching together the neighborhood. So as we move forward, we're going to do a better job of articulating that and showing all those peripheral projects. Gretchen was talking about all the stuff related to the river, but also showing how we're connecting to the neighborhoods and stitching that together. A desire to see the site be more linked to the neighborhoods, desire to see other adjacent projects, emphasis on using the master plan as a foundation, and strong interest in blending the historic heritage of the site with the future. During the breakout portion of the session, we actually asked people to share their stories, which we knew was a big ask. I think a lot of people expect to come in and just put dots on things, so we had that opportunity too. But we had the opportunity for people to sit down and dictate their story if they wanted to, or a couple of people actually provided a video of kind of telling their story and history with the site. And so we got 7 pretty rich stories. A lot of people kind of stopped by this booth and made a few comments, but 7 really rich stories there. The folks working on the public art master plan were actually sort of kind of convened right next to this, and so they got a lot of great input on what people wanted to see in the public art in relation to the site. Then we asked people about what category is most interested in them, and most categories received interest. We had politics as a category, and they had 0 interest. Everything else received at least a couple of dots. So arts, family, nature, neighborhood, agriculture, history all scored very highly. But food, the workforce, bike lanes, all these other pieces. There are a lot of kind of write-in suggestions about the railroad and transportation. Thinking about the horse-drawn carriages, our proximity to the museum, and maybe tying in some of the elements there. Again, when we talked about how the story should be told, all these categories received interest, but the greatest interest was really in the architecture, the art, the events and programming, and ways to really link this to the neighborhood. And then where the story should be told, the riverfront was kind of the front runner. So, which I think reflects what we heard from the master plan effort. Looking at the main plaza that is being created with the new site plan, so between the kind of major arenas along Betty Cram Drive, that should say south, I'm sorry about that. South of the future Water Resource Center, the bus barn site, and outside the project boundary. So our next steps are basically drafting the cultural plan. So pieces of that are in progress. We're integrating all the input that we received from the community, as well as a series of stakeholder interviews, integrating all the work from input from the CAC, the work from the master plan effort, and then continue to talk to different partners about these different assets. Paul and his team have an educational programming work group that's meeting. CSU obviously has very strong ideas about how to really tell the story about education and pushing forward to the future. And so we're hoping to have that complete draft, as I said, ideally a draft prior to next month's meeting, which I think is the 31st. It's around there, yeah. So before I jumped into the preliminary public space programming piece, which is a little preview of another kind of big component that we're working on that will inform the design, I wanted to ask Julie to speak a little bit about a pretty exciting opportunity that we have this coming Monday.
So you guys already heard about this a little bit from History Colorado. So no, that's fine, that's fine. So not to go into a lot of detail, really want to shout out to Sean. He has been working on the logistics on this, so wish us luck. We've got 12 teenagers we have to keep entertained and energized for an entire day. But we're not just giving them a day off school, they're going to be working. So we're going to do a site tour, we're going to walk around the site, we're going to hand them challenges to give us feedback. We're actually going to give them design plans and let them actually draw out things, give us ideas. We're going to focus on the riverfront, we're going to focus on the 1909 building. So we've got a lot of very, very interactive activities, and it'll be a full day, so we'll make sure we provide you guys with an update afterwards.
Thank you, Julie. And then I'll just run through this last piece here and then open it up for questions. So the cultural plan is one major component, obviously very much related to the other report that Eric was talking about on the historic resources. But the cultural plan is a little broader. It has a large historic component, but also looking at present and future. The other piece, pretty related, was thinking about the public space programming. So that's about the physical elements within the space, but also the activities that happen within the spaces. And so just a quick overview of what you can expect when we deliver this towards the end of next month as well. Is basically what the public space programming is intended to do is identify and organize the public spaces. So it establishes a preliminary hierarchy of public space. It also catalogs them potential programming, and that's from the master plan, from other CAC activities that have been documented and actually distributed recently again, input or interviews, case studies, and additional community input. That is our draft cover we're working on. So the contents of this is looking at, re-articulates a vision statement in its relation to the programming, guiding principles, why do we care about the program, the role of the public space, and then articulating the role of the authority. And really suggesting that ultimately it's going to be their determination on what sort of happens within these spaces. So we're really trying to provide guidance, and enough guidance so as we embark on the design work, which is starting around now, that we have enough sort of direction, we narrow the realm of possibility enough, that we can actually move forward with a meaningful design that really works for the community and for different users of the site. The public realm program then has space types, programming types, environmental considerations, adaptive reuse of elements, so it pulls some of those pieces from the historic component, public realm programming, and then events and activation is basically in 2 categories. So it would be special events, so it could be a one-time, it could be something that happens weekly or monthly or annually, and then daily activation. So the public space that we're talking about, just to be really clear with everyone, it's everything in color on here. So, for instance, and I won't go through every single one, but 4 is the riverfront open space. We're talking about the bridges and the roadways too. As you know, kind of in our existing neighborhoods and districts and community, those streets and how we get around contributes quite a bit to kind of that feeling of open space and community. So we're looking at that. We're looking at the plazas in between all the buildings, so that would be signified by 1 and 2, and then the yards, really importantly, with number 3. We want to make sure that the bridges and the underpasses and those connectors are really safe and inviting and help tell a story as well. So those are included. So we're looking at, as I said, events and activation, different elements of the program, thinking about different types of spaces, and that will be basically organized into programmatic functional recommendations. So that's about the spatial requirements. So there's a long laundry list of things that came out of the master plan, came out of the CAC discussions, came out of our interviews with a lot of different sort of programming partners, or potential partners. And so we are looking at the spatial sort of dimensions of those different public spaces, and can things fit? Can they be permanent? Do they have to be temporary? One example is the velodrome that was brought up, I think, in the master planning process. And we determined that, yeah, we could probably fit one somewhere on the site, but it would probably be temporary, and it'd have to be in the yards. So those are some of the things, just that we're thinking about, is where might those things go, and where do they fit, and what's the temporal component, like when are they there? Public accessibility, which includes ADA, security needs, mechanical plumbing, electrical. So are we having pop-up events for a farmer's market, and do we want that to have powered space? In the yards, that would be built in, but are there other spaces where that's necessary? Do we need supports for stanchions if we're lining people up in an entry plaza into an arena? And then the urban design components, thinking about the balance of landscape and hardscape. We were talking about the different types of green earlier, the money green and the growing green. So what do those look like? Horizontal urban design elements and vertical. And then the events programming of public space is basically in several categories, and this is where we're looking at which spaces are those most appropriate in to kind of narrow the field. And so those are in the categories of agricultural, food and animal, educational, sports and athletic, cultural and entertainment, and other. And again, these are our attempt at categorizing that full laundry list of ideas that have come about over the last really probably 4 or 5 years, leading to, from the beginning of the master planning effort. So that is my relatively quick update, open to questions.
So before we go into questions, I think Gretchen wants to add a couple of things.
First, I want to thank. First, I'd like to complain about the microphone. First, I want to thank. Look, we might have to get a new microphone. First, I want to thank Jay and Julie and Eric and Sean.
Can I have the other microphone? Thanks.
I want to thank this team that's working on this, because you guys are so passionate about it, and it is one thing that we heard at the industry coffees, that a couple of times we heard, that people want to work on this in their professional life because it's the chance of a lifetime, was what one person said, to be able to participate here. And we continue to attract these really high caliber teams. Saunders is here tonight. That's another example. And I feel very fortunate that you guys put your hearts into this. So it shows in your presentations. I would like to, going forward, and this is stemming from a conversation that has been had here the last couple of meetings and that Mickey and I were able to follow up on, that as we go through with public realm and these additional layers of complexity around the design of the site, that we take some of the through movements for pedestrians that you guys have been working on through the site that have been really prioritized, that we make sure we show that visually connecting from community, and that overlay gets applied to all of these future steps so that we make sure that we've got the right points of entry and not stopping at the campus boundary, but obviously, and this is something that I know from working with you guys that you're thinking about, but I wanted to make that clear here tonight, that we would show those connectivity points so that a person in Globeville or a person on the east side of this campus in Elyria and Swansea would know how to get there and what route they're going to take, what they're going to see, overlay it to the programming and the public realm. And when we get to the vertical design of the buildings, making sure that those buildings then have the foresight of what that experience is of moving to and through the campus. So that's something that we'll be following up on. And I know it's kind of just taking the work that you're already doing and presenting it in a slightly different fashion, but really reaching into the community and obviously partnering with NDCC and Public Works at the same time.
Yeah,
so,
we'd love to do that.
Thanks.
Other questions? AE?
This might be an exclamation point on some of what Gretchen just said. I'd like you to add another shaded color, perhaps a transparency, that gives the possible direct link, leveraging points with the content and mission of the National Western Carpio, the outdoor classrooms we have at Heron Pond, what is being accomplished at Garden Place Academy. This is a long-standing potential that I really feel we haven't met, and we can do this directly with the schools, directly with Parks and Rec, directly with Public Works. We don't need intermediaries. We just have to do leverage grants. We need to do established programs. There's a lot of soft programming, education, constructivist, experiential education. I really feel like placemaking is potentially much broader and deeper, given the mandate of this project, than is presented by I know the singular focus on the footprint is important. The other side of not the other side, but the Globeville side of the neighborhood side of the river, these are all areas where we can seed the imagination. So I'd like that to be a constant part of it, not just, oh yeah, we thought about that and it's on the table a little bit. Let's bring it out.
Great.
Mickey?
In terms of the meeting, and Gretchen and I spoke, and I think and I spoke to you, and I guess my concern is I spoke to you and your team both about this issue and both about affordable housing, and you come to this meeting and neither one of them is even mentioned, and I think we're not getting the report of really what's happening, but the report of what you'd like to see happen. And in terms of the connectivity, I mean, I look at the maps that you presented at that meeting. There's not a piece outside of the National Western Campus on there. You need to show this community where you connect, how you get to the city, how you get to the river. I'm not asking you to build them. I'm just saying that we need those connections. I had a conversation with the Forney Museum. This is a really important piece. What is the connection? We had a long list of what the neighborhood want, and basically I was told, or Gretchen was gracious enough to write a letter saying that these weren't included in essentially the plan, but at least the connections to those kind of things, so we can begin to look at it. I mean, it's kind of a myopic look at, you keep saying this is going to happen, but nobody knows how to get there. And we need to connect to this community. I mean, And that may not be within your specific scope, but I'm saying it's the responsibility of the National Western to basically at least say how they're going to connect. We've talked about a farm, or we've talked about equestrian trails. I'm not asking to build it. I'm not asking that you spend the money on those things, but at least show it somewhere so the community could say, yes, it's on the plan, and where does it connect? And I think it's important to be able to see the choreography of what happens on the site and how it connects. I mean, we're going to, right now, you're going to have some barriers when you have shows in terms of how the community gets in there, how you go from one event or one showing to the other. I mean, those are the things that really we're not seeing, but particularly the community. We have so many assets here, and they're just, you know, all of it centers about what's going to happen in this building or that building, but it's really how people are going to get there, and at the same time, it really is going to stimulate the interest of the private sector to come in and say, we can see the map, we can see what's happening at National Western. We want to participate, we want to invest. And I think we're missing that element. And I am concerned because I spoke with you and I spoke to someone else from your office, and both of you said, yes, we'll acknowledge that and we'll look at it next time. And there was nothing tonight. And I think it's important that you begin to look at that.
Yeah, in our summary, I do apologize. I remember you mentioning housing. At the meeting, I did not have that on the slide. We didn't change any of the graphics that we presented at the meeting because we were trying to reflect back to you sort of what was at the meeting. But absolutely, hear you loud and clear tonight, heard it at the meeting as well from you and others about the connection to the neighborhood. And again, moving forward, we didn't produce any new material for tonight, but in that new material, you definitely will see that.
Yeah, just want to echo on Mickey's statement. You know, I think it's really critical is the multimodal approach in terms of the infrastructure. How does everything connect? Yeah. Is it a bike? Is it a path? Is it, you know, how do we integrate all that multimodal connectivity? And what are the different methodologies that we can employ to be able to connect within our community and within the surrounding areas? That would be cool if you could lay something out like that.
Yeah,
thank you.
We've been looking at that pretty extensively, and to Gretchen's point, we're doing the work and we just need to bring it to you and communicate it to the community in a good way.
I would like to mention that being in the neighborhood, I hear them talk so much about they're tearing this house down and tearing that house down, and we even tried to get them to change the RTD name, and it didn't work. We wanted to have it historic area on the RTD, but they had their mind made up that they wouldn't do it. And so we have lost that. We kind of judged ourselves on the fact that we're historic and we're heritage, and we have a lot of Western atmosphere. Every time you look out there, it's going slowly. We're losing it all. And I think there should be some information about what we can save now. And I've had a lot of people talk about having mementos and things to save. I haven't seen them, but I do mention it when I talk to people. And I think that I just told them to turn them in, and then I know you would really appreciate all that kind of thing. Thank you.
I did just want to respond to that. That's also a part of showing you the work that we're doing. So that early action on Brighton to clear that and the demands on that required us to look at that set of structures, and that's why we took the actions we did on 4701. What you're going to see going forward is a comprehensive look at the campus and a proposal coming forward for the rest of what is there and potentially eligible to be historic. And it's part of why History Colorado is such an important partner to us. So I know that has been a hard conversation in these meetings and with the community. And if you need us to get out there and talk to folks about that historic plan, we're willing to do that. Eric presented a part of it tonight. We'll have recommendations that I think people will be excited about. Some of the things we found out there that the team has found and cataloged and creating this really detailed inventory, I think are going to be exciting. It's part of why we brought Sean on board to tell those stories. So I do think it gets better from here. But if there are folks in the community that we need to go out and talk to, just let us know. We'll come on and go around and do visits too. It doesn't have to be a formal meeting. It can just be in someone's house or a cup of coffee, or if anyone wanted to ever come to the Wellington Web Building, go through security, find a place to park, all that, they can come there too. But we're willing to go out to the community too. So keep us posted, and I think you're going to see some things that are pretty interesting. Yeah.
Any other comments? This mic is totally dying, so.
I just have one brief comment to make. Thank you for the work you've done. I find it very enlightening and with a degree of guidance. And as one of the authority members,
You want it to be there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel that what you're doing is crucially important
Make sure it stays there. Comes
to our direction. I share some of the feelings of Mickey and Armando. Some time back in Globeville, when we started the planning process, we've been crying for a planner for the last, I don't know how many years, and finally, we got into a planning process, and a new word to me then was connectivity. Dave can attest to this. For years, we lived in Globeville in complete isolation. And in a lot of ways, it was a good isolation because we had our neighborhood to ourselves. And it was beautiful, it was great. That's changed, and we need to then upgrade. A little premature connectivity means bridges. And all the amenities that Armando and Mickey alluded to in that connectivity process. And I want to make a comment. It's a little premature because nobody's even got the design of the bridges yet. But I would like to see a bridge comparable to the Eiffel Tower. No, not just a bridge to move traffic from the National Western Center. I think a bridge needs to reflect the specifics Armando and Dave and Mickey have constantly hammered away at. That bridge has to be more than just a simple mode of connectivity. We're talking about a cultural connection, an economic connection, and an educational connection, and that damn not better be just a flat-ass concrete crossing. It's got to be something that's very reflective and inclusive to the work that's been going on for the last 10 years in this effort. So when it gets down to designing that bridge, these principles need to be involved in that. It's got to be just a bridge that moves traffic and people, but that tells the story when it's being utilized.
Great comment. Thank you. And I definitely hear you specifically on the bridge, and I hope it is glorious. And it is in a lot of different ways, not just physically. I think the sentiment also applies to those other neighborhood connections. That connectivity is important and multimodal connectivity is important, but it's about the quality of the experience too. And so you probably feel it when you walk around your neighborhood or walk around downtown. If you're walking along, nondescript buildings or parking lots or whatever the abandoned property, it feels like a long ways. It's an experience you don't want to have, and so we need to make sure that these connections are not only physically there and accommodate different modes, but also a really great quality and experience.
There's a great bridge in Paris.
Anything else on the subject before we move on to updates? Gretchen?
Oh, wait,
I saw one.
we did the
We did that early. All right, I'm sorry.
The only piece that we did not touch on, and we want to carry this forward as an agenda item. It's the future phases in the triangle, phases 3 through 8. We don't have a significant update on that. I just want to make sure we're coming back to it. The one thing our team has determined as part of the city's process is that we'll be using a request for qualifications followed by a request for proposals when we get to that point. That might be as early as this fall is what we're targeting. And but it would not be, there has been a conversation with the broader city team about a policy to accept unsolicited proposals. We will not be using that. That would be a forum where we could get apples and oranges, and I think it would actually take longer for us to review all these different proposals. So we are planning to go with a more traditional but expedited RFQ, request for proposals RFP process. So that's the update from our team. It's not very exciting. Brad's busy putting all of us together and in rooms so that we can continue due diligence, and we'll bring that forward to you as we have more materials.
Quick question. Can you see it? Bye. Can you give us the essential benefit to doing the request for qualifications and then the request for proposals, especially as it helps for the selection of what you're talking about now and for the utility, as opposed to skipping the request for qualification? Because I like that you're doing that.
Really, the simplest answer is that it's the city's process. That's our standard procurement approach. It does allow us to shortlist and limit the number of proposals we receive and be able to spend more time and be more in-depth with what comes forward. But what that means is it's also a way for us to be pretty public going through a two-step process. So the city uses lots of different procurement models. On this one, I agree. I think it's the right strategy so that we're managing our kind of public outreach and that robust public process that we had on phases 1 and 2. So I'm not sure I answered your question.
No, let me just say one thing and then we'll let it go because of time. We can talk more about it because we're having to pay attention to some important things right now. And we can talk, I'll just make the statement and we can leave it open. I really do think requests for qualifications from a layperson's point of view help make sure that those that take the step into the proposals really have the scope of skills and depth and true ability to do what we need them to do over decades. So I don't like it's the answer that it's the short answer. I know it's I was asking specifically because I think there are things that have to do with what the nature of this National Western Center project is, where requests for qualifications are really critical. So.
I would just like to make one sentence. I apologize. I didn't mean I was putting them down. I think that Eric and Sean have just done so many things for us, and every time they do things. In fact, the other day they even found kittens and saved some kittens. And so I really thank them. I have people that have businesses down there. They always call up, what's happening to this and what's happening to that. And I'm so happy when we can say yes. It's just the fact that some of the houses in the area are very historic, and they're being completely put into parking lots just recently. That's what I wasn't condemning that stock show. It's the area that's happening. Thank you.
Any other comments from the committee? For the good of the order, any other comments from anybody from the public? Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. We are done. Keep in mind, this is the last day of May.
So you'll give me a call?
I'll give you a call.
Okay, great.
About 4.